Today, I have two guests from a very special organization in our state, 1,000 Friends of Maryland. I had the pleasure of serving on the board of directors for 1,000 Friends in the early years, and the group has managed to survive all the challenges and travails of being a nonprofit with a staff and a mortgage to pay. Established in 1994 by some who are still on the board of directors today, 1,000 Friends has grown to become a statewide resource for those seeking information on a better way to grow our state and our communities. Thanks to the efforts of the executive director, 1,000 Friends of Maryland is recognized by the governor and state legislatures as a source for advocacy on matters of growth and patterns of development that we can afford socially, economically, and environmentally. With me today is executive director of 1,000 Friends of Maryland since 1998, Drew Schmidt-Perkins, and the chair of their board of director, Dale Sams. Welcome, folks.
Thank you, Neil.
Well, Drew, let me start off and ask you, for people that are not familiar with 1,000 Friends of Maryland, what is the organization about? What does it try to accomplish?
Well, what we accomplish is to make sure that we have a sustainable future for this state. And that means that we have a strong rural economy and that we have vital, vibrant, existing communities again. So it really is a matter of steering our resources to have a future for Maryland that everybody can thrive in, not just one sector of the economy.
I like to think, and correct me if I'm wrong, that 1,000 Friends looks at the big landscape in Maryland as opposed to each little tiny community, and that individual landscape, 1,000 Friends, it's a statewide organization. It does deal with all the communities.
We do. That's why we have 1,000 Friends, is because it is a big job. We could use 10,000, I think. And that's right, because when you look just individually at a specific parcel or even a specific community, you often get lost in the cumulative impacts of what's happening for good or for bad. And so we do. We look at the cumulative impacts on how we're growing, what's happening to our communities, how our money's being spent, and focus there to be able to give the resources back to the groups who are focused locally and help them make better decisions about their local land use.
Yep. All right. Well, Dale, you joined 1,000 Friends just a few years ago.
That's
You're
right.
a resident of Allegheny County, so you've
Correct.
come a long way today, and I
Yes.
appreciate that very much. How did you find out about 1,000 Friends, and how did you become a member of the board?
Well, several years ago, Neil, when our former governor was attempting to sell some of our state lands, I started paying attention to that kind of activity and noticed that 1,000 Friends was very much involved in that, and Drew in particular in taking a position in opposition to doing that. And this was a very fascinating group to me. At the same time, a threat had come to Allegheny County. I consider it a threat, some don't. A very large development that was going to be built right next to Green Ridge State Forest. And I thought, where can we go for assistance and help on some of that kind of, in learning how to deal with this and what we're facing. And of course, I started attending seminars and forums and talking to Drew and others who are familiar with 1,000 Friends. And as you said, this is an informational group. They were extremely helpful to us. One thing came to another. I joined the board, and as you noted earlier, I was fortunate enough to be elected chair here just earlier this year.
Good. The development you spoke of, that's Terrapin Run?
It is. It's a Terrapin Run. A developer from Columbia had decided to buy a large plot of ground there and build what one of the newspapers, I believe it was the Washington Post, dubbed the poster child for sprawl.
Okay. I'll come back to Terrapin Run in a minute, I think.
Sure.
Drew, you're serving on the Governor's Sustainable Growth Commission.
right.
We were appointed by the governor along with several other members. Can you tell us about the commission and what role it may have played in Plan Maryland?
Sure. The commission came out of a governor order and a piece of legislation that wanted to make sure that there was a team of people that were looking across interest groups from across the state to really look comprehensively about Maryland's growth patterns. And one of the charges assigned to it by the legislature was to be a part of Plan Maryland, to be helping to advise its shape, commenting on it, that kind of thing. So we've been engaged, and we started off actually as a task force for a couple of years working on these issues, then decided it needed to be a long-term commission, not a short-term task force. So we've been looking at these issues now for a number of years and helping to advise on how to move forward. There's a work group that meets every 2 weeks on the commission. It's very, very engaged.
So you mentioned that the group met for a couple of years. I think it's kind of the story with Plan Maryland in some ways, because some people are behaving as if it just came out of the blue. And
Right.
it's really been a consensus process, if I'm not mistaken, that's going on for quite some time.
Well, it was first required by the state legislature back in the 70s. So the requirement for a state development plan has been around for a long time. This is the administration that finally said that they were going to obey the law and actually do a state plan. So it's about time. It's 30 years later, okay. And so then the administration began to say, we're going to do this. What should it look like? It's held more workshops than I can remember, talking to thousands of Marylanders about what should be included, what shouldn't be, how it should be done. But every time a draft is written, any one of us can read it and be worried about what's in it or what's not in it. But the process has been very, very open. And I have found that the state has been very open to hearing concerns and working them through. The comment period just closed on the second draft. We're probably going to see another version before the governor signs off on it. But it has come so far from, well, what should we do, to really getting involved in a process on how the state should be using its very tight resources more effectively.
There's a huge effort going on to stall the enabling
Sure.
action that the governor holds on this. We'll maybe talk about the next legislative session, but I think it's what some folks are aiming on. Dale, you mentioned, I asked you about Terrapin Run. What role did Terrapin Run have in the 2009 Smart Green and Growing legislation? What's the importance of comprehensive plans in the state of Maryland?
Yeah, those are good questions. One of the bills was actually dubbed the Terrapin Run bill, and so I would like to think that some of the work that we as a grassroots organization did, not Thousand Friends, but another organization that we established in Allegheny County called Citizens for Smart Growth in Allegheny County. These were folks who came together to try to deal with this and understand it better. But what we realized early on in looking at that development and what it would mean was that how inconsistent that plan or the development was with the comprehensive plan that had been adopted for Allegheny County. And so ultimately, I think as this progressed through the court structure, through the testimonies that were given before our Board of Zoning Appeals, people realized that there was a real disconnect between local land use decisions being made in Allegheny County and on an ad hoc basis almost, and the comprehensive plan, which had gone through the process of being developed by the local planners with public input and so on and so forth. And in seeing that there was such a disconnect, I think that came to the attention of the governor's staff and to the governor, and that it ultimately found its way into the legislation that was passed.
Well, the judge in the case ruled that the comprehensive plan didn't have to be followed.
Correct.
And that was a small problem because state law actually says repeatedly that it does. Really, really, you do. So the Terrapin Run
Yes.
bill actually for us says, no, 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 legal system, look here, really, 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 you must follow your comprehensive plan. You must, really. And so that bill was a corrective action from a very poor legal decision. But it gave us an opportunity to make the case about how important comprehensive plans are and why they must be followed. So it was an excellent exercise, ultimately putting the best face on the amount of time you had to spend on making that case and raising, again, the issue of comprehensive plans.
It's a really important issue here in Carroll County because, again, we're addressing our comprehensive plan, and it seems in some ways that there's a rush to just get it done because we've frankly dragged our feet on it for about 10 years now. And there was a misstep in the way we were going about it a year or two ago, in all fairness. But I do hate to see it rushed when it's such an important document and needs to be done, I believe every 6 years, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. Well, Drew, let me ask you what maybe is a simple question, but I don't think there's a simple answer. Why plan Maryland? Why now?
Well, one, it's 30 years late, so why now? But if we look at it, a business has a business plan. My organization has a strategic plan. A coach has a game plan. The state needs a plan. The state particularly needs a plan when the resources are so tight and the consequences so dire. So everybody knows that all our local governments and state budgets are on the brink. I mean, we're really, really struggling. But we're also struggling environmentally. The Bay is on the cusp of getting better or dying. Our local rivers and streams are polluted and we can bring them back. Drinking water is on the cusp. Many of our communities are on the cusp of thriving or dying. Everything seems to be in the balance. This is the time that we need to make sure that every single tax dollar that we have is being used so strategically that it benefits the most people for the most good. We have nothing left to waste. So it, one, gets us to use our money much more effectively. Two, it provides really important transparency to local governments and to the citizens about the decision making. We will be funding this because it meets the goals of the plan. We won't be funding this because it's counter. And that way people can plan better for their future, know what kinds of things to expect and what not to. So it's a really important step in transparency and honesty and effectiveness.
Yeah. Knowing that, again, 1,000 Friends of Maryland is a statewide organization and that you get around the state, as does your staff, how are other areas receiving Plan Maryland? I know we have local opposition here with our Carroll County Board of Commissioners, and I suppose at least Frederick County is not appeared to be too anxious for it. But what's your overall read?
It's very mixed. A number of counties have sent in letters of support that they appreciate being involved in the process to set this, that to have the clear direction that the state is finally going to have its act together and not sending conflicting messages. Do this, no, do this. Our priority is this priority, all that. So we've seen many good comments and support from any number of counties. Others are very worried that it's going to interfere with their local planning and zoning rights. The problem or the benefit of Plan Maryland is it does not change any laws. All laws still are in place. Nothing changes. So if a law says that local governments get to do their planning and zoning, that doesn't change. Nothing changes from this. So what it does do is say state discretionary dollars will be spent according to this plan. So you can plan stupid if you want. Go for it. The state's just not going to bail you out anymore.
Sure. Just as a for instance, it would be schools. If you want to go ahead and allow growth, which would demand a new school, most of the funding for any school comes from the state. So those funds could be withheld then, I suppose.
Right. And if you're going to develop your countryside in such a way that you're going to have to run more and more school buses, more and more miles, The state pays about a third of those costs. You may not get any more money to do that. And
You're
so
on
that's
your
going
own
to,
to be as stupid as you want.
well, we hope that it's the right incentive and provides a clearer guidance about where state dollars will be used and where they won't.
I think it's really helpful because it causes the local communities to focus more on where they want their infrastructure to exist, where the state participates and looks at, along with the local community, whether it's a municipality or whether it's a county, to determine where growth makes the most sense from the development of future infrastructure. You mentioned schools. That's something that's of concern to us right now in the city of Cumberland. That you almost look at that and say, yes, this is something that is important to all of us, both on a local level and at the statewide level.
So you see that being the predominant impact in Allegheny and Cumberland, where you're from?
I think it is, and I think it's a very positive impact, Neil, because it really doesn't change the decisions that are going to be made or that have been made locally. But for example, Cumberland was, as I believe Westminster was just named as a sustainable community. And what Plan Maryland is doing is articulating some of the things that have already been going on. I'm familiar with Cumberland, of course, and not some of the other communities. But for example, reinforcing through tax credits and other financial advantages how to recover a community like Cumberland that at one time had a population in excess of 40,000 people and is now about 20,000, where the infrastructure already exists to sustain additional growth and development. And to me, these are pluses for our to help revitalize and rejuvenate our older communities.
Well, talk, if you would, for a moment about the role of planning in the current economy. Drew, could you go to that first?
Sure. I think that every family has found that they have to plan a whole lot more with their budgets. I know our family has 3 kids, college tuitions, everything else. So we have to be a whole lot more strategic and thoughtful about how we're going to spend our dollars and what our priorities are. And that's what planning allows us to do. I mean, what's the alternative to planning? Not to plan. So utter chaos, just free for all. I mean, planning is such a positive thing. It really allows you to think clearly about how you want to get from point A to point B with the funds that you have. And that's what we think is so critical, especially when dollars are this tight. Whether it's transportation dollars, do we spend it on new roads when we can't maintain our existing roads? Do we spend it on widening highways when people are having a hard time filling up their gas tanks to get to work? Or are we going to spend it on ways so that people have alternatives to meeting their needs other than having to get on the highway and drive the beltway at great cost? And this is what planning allows us to do.
I think perhaps some folks have forgotten that this is not the heyday of the state when tax revenues were filling the coffers as quickly as they were emptied, and we could have just about everything that we wanted to do and spread the money around as easily as possible. I would like to think that the people in Mako and the Maryland Municipal League both have come to understand that that's not the time of today, and that things need to be changed. And the belt tightening obviously is at the county level first. We may see some more of that in the next legislative session, for all I know. But anyway, generally, people have been looking at Plan Maryland in terms of growth and development. But does it not also look at safe drinking water and the health of the bay as well?
It is really a fascinating document. I mean, one provides us all kinds of great data about where is the state heading. If we're to change nothing now and just take the plans, Maryland is going to develop another 400,000 acres. That's like 2 or 2 point something of Cecil counties. I mean, it's huge amounts of land will be paved over. And what Plan Maryland shows is that every bit of additional pavement actually hurts our water quality. And as I mentioned earlier, the bay is on the cusp. Our drinking water is being threatened in many parts. And development is the fastest growing source of pollution in the Chesapeake Bay. We're getting a handle on so much else, whether it's agriculture or sewage treatment plants. But if we're going to achieve the goals of clean water that I think all of us want, to be able to wade in our local stream or drink our drinking water or go swimming or eat the fish, we have to stop polluting from every source, including future development. So that's a big part of the plan.
And I think if I could add just a couple of things, when we look at, or when Plan Maryland is taking a look at, say, some of the western counties, like Allegheny, for example, the source of some of our cleanest drinking water downstate is in creeks and streams in Allegheny County. So this is important to us too, to be thinking about, okay, what areas should we be preserving and protecting, what conserving for purposes of the state as a whole, even though, and it's also important for us. These are good, high quality fishing streams. A lot of folks from elsewhere in the state come up to Allegheny County to hunt and fish and take advantage of the 50,000 acres of the Green Ridge State Forest and others, and in Garrett as well. So focusing on water quality at the source is something that I think makes a lot of sense.
And as we all know, Carroll County is right in the watershed of most of the drinking water for the Baltimore region. So for Baltimore County, Harford County, Howard County, Baltimore City, and parts of Anne Arundel County get their drinking water, a lot of which begins here. And so we have to think regionally. We have to think long-term. We have to plan because the consequences are just stunningly bad if we don't.
Yeah, it's inconvenient to think regionally. And
complicated.
politically
It's not
convenient
easy.
to do just the local issue, so to speak. If you could isolate Carroll County and only concern yourself with the issues here, that might be one thing, but we are a part of one state.
And Plan Maryland has helped elevate that for some of us who don't, maybe further to the west, sometimes don't think about that. I know we talk about one Maryland in the western part of the state, but we really do have to think of it in terms of one Maryland, what's good for the whole, and I think it'll have a very positive impact for us in the western part of the state as well.
Drew, isn't that really why we have a state office of planning? Is that too obvious?
To get to the obvious question, yes.
Well, I mean, we have state government for a reason, and the state office, the Maryland Department of Planning, is just this amazing resource filled with incredibly talented people who really want to help. They have incredible data and information so that you can really have the information you need in order to help make good decisions. They have experts, they have access to other experts, and I don't think that we use them enough and well enough. But they're also poor folks who are on the front lines all the time. They're the ones that are leading Plan Maryland. They're the ones that are saying, no, you know, this doesn't meet your comprehensive plan. We're going to make that a comment area, so we're not going to fund in there. They're a small agency, but they're the agency that has all the information that all the other agencies need in order to be effective. Transportation needs to know where the people are going to live in the future. Health needs to know the same thing. So their data is core to just about everything else that we do, yet they're just a tiny agency.
And Neil, it's been very interesting to me. I've been very pleased to see representatives from the Maryland Department of Planning come out to Frostburg State to hold forums on Plan Maryland, to ask people what they think, to get feedback and input, and it's opened up a communication process statewide that I think has been very valuable. Something a little different maybe for some of us as far west as Allegheny County, but I think that's been a real plus for us.
Well, in our remaining time here, I want to touch on a few things that are planning related and I think have to do with 1,000 Friends of Maryland, but you stop me if I've drifted too far. You mentioned, Drew, that Plan Maryland doesn't bring any legislation with it. There are those who seem to think that septic legislation is coming along with Plan Maryland. Is that?
They're completely, I mean, as we all know, legislation has been introduced in the General Assembly over the last couple of years to deal with the serious problem of septic system pollution. Many people just are unaware that a house on water and sewer pollutes 6 to 10 times more than a house on a sewer system. A house on well and septic pollutes 10 times more than a house on water and sewer. And that's a problem. And so, I mean, so Plan Maryland is happening, like I said, over the past 30 years on its path, and the septic system legislation has been out there the last couple of years and then elevated by the governor over the last year.
Is that more of an issue for just the people that are on Kent Island, so to speak, who have
No.
a real issue, or the whole Chesapeake watershed?
The whole Chesapeake watershed is affected by this. There isn't a place that isn't. Now, they're affected differently, and according to hydrology and various other things, but on the whole eastern shore, we're seeing rising nitrogen levels in drinking water supply, and that's bad. You don't want to drink nitrogen at certain levels, blue baby syndrome, various other problems. I'm not a health expert. I don't want to go too far there. Water in our drinking water, in our rivers, and nitrogen in our water, in our nitrogen in our waterways is like fertilizing them, and they cause algae blooms and various other problems. So we need to keep it out of our water no matter where we are. We don't want to drink it. We don't want to put it in our waterways. And that means we have to get real about how easy it's been to develop in the middle of a cornfield a house which not only pollutes 10 times more, but doesn't pay its own way in taxes. And we can't have both. We can't have a much more polluting and a house that we have to subsidize with taxes anymore. And so these things are coming to a head.
Let me ask you about Farm Fest. You just had an event at Farmer Tom's Farm in Reisterstown,
Right.
which I had an opportunity to enjoy myself.
Oh, good.
Why is A Thousand Friends of Maryland doing events like Farm Fest?
That's a great question. One of the things that we realized a number of years ago when we looked at where were we failing as an organization, and what we saw was a number of farms converting to development. And that was a failure. That was something that was happening at a rate. So then we began to look at why that was, and we saw a number of organizations working very, very hard on preserving land. And there's lots of programs to help farmers protect the land, but there wasn't programs to help farmers stay farming, to protect the actual farming. We saw that as a big gap, and we kicked off a program 3 years ago called Keep Farmers Farming. We name things simply in our organization, and so it's clear what we do. And we have been meeting with the agricultural community and the environmental community, with people from all people who eat food, people who buy food, to try to really figure out how do we keep farmers farming so they don't feel that they have to sell their farm to development, that they can make a good enough living, that they can buy a farm as a second, people who retire onto the farm, or the young people coming up can start farming on the next generation farms. And we have found it to be a fascinating place to be engaged. We haven't found all the solutions yet, but we're working on things from estate taxes to ways to better sell produce, all those kinds of things. So that's the purpose. And then we instead of having some kind of stuffy event every year, we have a big party with lots of bands out on a great farm to raise money, have fun, and introduce people to the organization.
So it looked like it was a very successful event.
Well,
Thank you.
and I was glad Drew made that last point, to introduce people to the organization. It's great to have, excuse me, I think something like about 800 people who were in attendance this year, and have other members of our board of directors who were there, staff who were there, to talk to those individuals, to talk about the large issues that Thousand Friends concerns itself with, not only in the Reisterstown area and in the Baltimore area, but all across the state. I love to come down to events like that and talk about, interact with folks from this area and talk about some of the things that are of concern to us in the western end of the state as well.
It's a whole new constituency of sorts for
It
1,000
is.
Friends of Maryland. I think it's a wonderful area that you've taken on more, okay?
That's the problem,
It's not like you
right?
didn't have enough to do before.
There are times when we wonder if we're stretching ourselves, well, let's say.
There are
maybe-
times, we know we stretched ourselves too thin, but
Yeah.
it got to be done.
Well, I'm going to have to wrap things up here because they do, they want the studio back, by golly.
Sure.
Thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate you coming out from Baltimore, Drew, and from Cumberland, Dale. Thank you so much.
Thank
You're
you,
welcome.
Neil.
Thank you for inviting us.